Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started into this episode.
Thank you very much for having me yet again. We are talking about a very important topic today, a very important aspect that we have witnessed over the years, and we are now re-witnessing again. It seems like history is now repeating itself. I think it will be important for us first to understand what lawfare is. Lawfare is simply the use of laws and institutions of a country to suppress, oppress, and delegitimize, smear your opponents or those that you deem as threats. And it's more like using the laws of the country and the institutions of a country as a pocket knife, which you can always take out and use to attack your enemies or those that you deem as threats. And it will be important for us to understand that in Africa, the institutions that we have in Africa right now, the laws that we have in Africa right now, they're not of African origin. We inherited them from the colonialists, and they were imposed by colonialists to protect colonial interests. And as such, these laws, as the times have progressed with the fighting for our liberation, with the fighting for our independence, there's been slight changes when it comes to real matters that we were fighting for in the beginning. I'm talking about our mineral resources. I'm talking about our land. The very things that our fathers were fighting for were commodified. The law was used to make these things fall under the property of privileges or property rights. That is to mean that in as much as we had gained our political independence, it was made difficult for us to gate our economic independence. And it is being further tightened and made impossible for us to gain our economic sovereignty, so to speak, as Africa. In the name of foreign direct investment, in the name of investors, in the name of job creation, you name it, the list is endless. But for us to be able to understand these aspects, we need to understand what happened in the past. Because for us to understand, we now we talk about property rights. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights under the United Nations talks about property rights and the protection of these rights and the preservation of these rights, so to speak. But whose rights are actually being preserved? Whose rights are actually being protected? Does it mean that before these laws were promulgated by the colonialists, we did not have any rights in Africa? Does it mean that the land had the owners of the land back then had no property rights to speak of? So these are the things that come to mind. So we need to have a reference point first, my brother, before we talk about these things. What and when was started? By who? For what purpose? For what end? If you clearly look at the aspects at the underlying aspects of these laws in most instances, when it comes to land and minerals, the core issues of African sovereignty and independence, you understand that the laws were never meant to protect the African. They were never meant to protect the African in any way, but they were meant to dispossess, suppress, and maintain the status quo where the African licks the hand of the master like a dog licks the hand of his owner.
Well, that is going to be very important. And of course, I'm going to be asking you different questions related to this aspect because it is very important. Like I said before, this argument is a very important one because if we look at issue in many parts of Africa, particularly in the issue of Zimbabwe, for example, the land issue there and what it has led to, how it has led to the crumbling of the country through the economic international policy that are being imposed, deliberate sanction because there's Mugabe decided to dare to make certain decisions, you see. So the
Yes.
first question I think I will ask you now, so that we can sort of go to the origin, to the beginning. I wanted to speak to the fact of who really are the owner of the land when we talk of lands in Africa, because I want to believe that if you go to Russia, you cannot say that the Russian land is under the Treaty of International Law. That is the Russian land, is their own property. If you go to
Yes.
China, it is not the United Nations that determine how to treat land in China. That is the Chinese property. So
Exactly.
there are some other issues, of course, that is going to come up in this area later on, like wildlife and other resources in Africa, which appear to be as if it will be administered by international bodies, whether they were supposed to be the property of the African people. They are the people that are supposed to decide how they want to deal with this property. If they are all animal, they are all piece of land. All this one, the baboon in the forest belong to the people that are in that area, because of course, you cannot just come from somewhere and say you are doing international research. For this reason, you are in charge. Anyway, we are going to get to that point. So
Yes.
who really are the owner of the lands in Africa, and how did it become property? Anyway, let first of all tackle that first.
Yes, the real owners of the land in Africa it's a fact that we cannot argue. It's something that we cannot go about beating about the bush. The African land is for the African. When we're talking about the African, we're talking about the native African. Those are the real stakeholders and stockholders of the African land. And we need to understand that it was not by chance that we Africans found themselves on the continent of Africa. It was not by probability or whatever the others might want to call it. It is by design that we, as Africans, found ourselves on the African continent, inhabiting our territories, terrestrial that is, and also having access to all the resources that you find in the African continent. That is the wildlife that we're going to get into, which is something that has not been deliberated by our liberators. They had other core issues that were at hand. That is the political freedom and the political emancipation of the African people at the time. That was pertinent. But Africa belongs to Africans. African land is for the African people. That's it. And anyone, any ardent student of history, anyone who's astute in their academic excellence, be it in the classroom, be it outside the classroom, be it being told through folklore by their grandparents, they know that Africa belongs to Africans, and Africans, in particular native Africans. That's a fact which we cannot debate. And this is our land. We come from here, we emanated here, we were born here, and we're going to die here. This is our land. This is our birthright. It cannot be disputed. It cannot be argued. It cannot be negotiated. It is our primary source of existence, God given for that matter. So it's not a privilege, it's a right.
All right, that is very important. Perhaps this might relate to something that I've made mention of in this podcast a number of times, that when we deal with land, it's not just by international convention. We need to enter into the philosophy of the people, because that is where I'm going to just now to ask you, in that we look at how many multinational companies deal with lands and landed property in Africa. Some of them, particularly those that are dealing with exploration, they don't have respect for the land. And this probably might be explained by the fact that they do not really care about the land, because they are not from this part of the earth. It doesn't care what happened to them. A good example would be how Shell BP treat the Niger Delta. Now, assuming Shell BP find this oil in Europe, will they treat it the same way? Will they treat the land the same way they treated the Niger Delta? The answer is obviously no. Because I've made this argument before, it's one of my books, that it is not right. You don't need to say, because the people don't have the power to be able to hold you accountable for this, you do whatever you like. That is, it means you are not mature. Because if you want to go into the dealing with people, you don't say because they cannot hold you accountable for that, you just treat them like animal. You need to know that you are dealing with human beings. Now, on the other way, if we were to flip the argument around, say Shell BP was an oil company owned by the people of the Niger Delta, will they treat the land the way they treated the Niger Delta? The answer also is no. Because they know that if they do that, they are destroying their land and they are destroying their existence. So I think that if we don't explain who owns the land, if we don't explain this issue very well, it becomes very easy for somebody to come from somewhere and do whatever he like. But this is wrong. So the question I want to ask you to get to that point now is, what really is our understanding of the land? Speaking from the point of view of many African countries, for example, or many African people, because from a point of view of country, we must still go back to the European Convention, to the Western Convention, because of course, many of the countries in Africa got independent not too long ago. So that is not where our history started from. So when I mean, what is our understanding of the land, I'm talking of the people who have been there before the European came to Africa.
Our understanding of land has been very clear from the beginning. Our grandparents knew what land means. Our parents knew what land means, and they know what land means to them. And the unfortunate part is that we tend to have an educational system that tends to divert attention from the core issues. It devalues the value of land. It does not emphasize the value of land to the African person. And it does not talk about the real history of the African person for them to understand why, when, and where, and what makes them to be what they are today. So it has to deal with the very fact that our people deliberately, by design, have been made to undervalue the value of land, to think that having land is something that is not of importance to them as long as they are not a farmer or they are not farming. It has made them to focus on the crumbs, whilst the main meal is left untouched. And the other thing is, it all boils down to the legislation, the lawfare that we've been talking about. You'll understand that the core issue is that whenever all our African countries fought for their independence, they had to negotiate for their constitutions. And who were the major brokers of those negotiations for those constitutions? Now, whenever you want to talk about land, they raise the constitution, they talk about the rule of law. Whose law, by the way? They talk about property rights. Whose property rights? Whose rights? And you understand that you cannot address those inequalities, those structural inequalities, those historical inequalities, those factual inequalities without addressing the laws that pertain and revolve around those same matters. So the challenge that we have is our educational system. It is our legal system. I mean, when I'm saying our legal system, I mean the way our people have been schooled in terms of the law. What is it that we talk about when we're talking about the law? What is it that we talk about when we're talking about justice? What is it that we talk about when we're talking about economics? There is no economics, my brother, without factoring the land in it. The problem is our Western trained economists, they think that economics must be administered and be monitored and managed in the perspective of the Western mindset. What about the African mindset? We're talking about the same lawfare which introduced paper money to the African, and whilst the African was made to focus on the paper money, the colonialists focused on the real money, which was gold. They took all the gold to Europe, whilst the African men pursued the paper money, which is used and perishes with the using. We can talk about, for example, my brother, when we're now talking about these matters, I can give you two vivid examples. The first example is that one of how South Africa got to be colonized, and the second example is that of how Zimbabwe got to be colonized. You'll find that South Africa was colonized by a company called the Dutch East India Company, which was led by Jan van Riebeeck in 1652. And Zimbabwe was colonized by the British South Africa Company, which was led by Cecil John Rhodes and his right man Jameson. So these two countries, great countries in Southern Africa, were colonized by companies which had the Royal Charter. Whose Royal Charter? The British Royal Charter. So who was spearheading the colonization of Africa? The same people who are parading themselves as the benefactors of Africa. The same people who are parading themselves as the saviors of the world. The very same people who are parading themselves as the champions of human rights and the preservation of property rights now today. They are the same people who had to oversee these two companies which colonized Africa and resulted in the introduction of taxes. Do you know that the African people were taxed? Some of the taxes are so ridiculous. The heart tax, the paw tax, the dog tax, the road tax. In your own country, being taxed by someone who has come from Europe, you just being taxed for owning a hat. I come to think of it, my brother, where was the rule of law then? You see, they promulgated a law that introduced tax to tax the native African. It was legal in its illegality to tax an African. But according to the laws of the colonial person, it was a legal thing to do. And for an African not to pay that tax was illegal. But was it really illegal not to pay the tax in your own land? Paying to a foreign person, for that matter. These are the things that when lawyers talk, they don't interrogate. What are they learning in their law school? The poll tax, for instance, I can talk about the poll tax. Poll tax, POLL. It was simply a tax that you paid for merely growing up. So by virtue of just turning 21 years and being African, you were supposed to pay tax to the colonialist for merely growing up. Imagine, is that justice? Where are the human rights? Where is the United Nations then? Where are these so-called activists that talk about the preservation of the right of the African or any human being for that matter?
I can really make a comparison of those type of taxes to the origin of these people, where they are coming from, because now I'm thinking that maybe, for example, the French, they talked of their assimilation policy, where English were talking of the association policy, something like that, which means that yesterday I interviewed a professor from Tennessee, where we talked a lot about the role of women in African liberation, in the liberation of the stronghold in Guinea-Bissau. So there we talked about some other issues, where he was saying that when he was growing up in Senegal, he was told that his ancestors were French, that he was coming from French, from France. So of course, this is a part of the French idea of how they see the world. That is fine.
Yes.
I even accept it like that. Now, it means that if I am a French person, I'm a French, my ancestors are French, it means that you should treat me like you treat the French people.
Exactly.
So if that is the case, if an African is being tasked for growing up, are the European also being tasked for growing up? Because now you are telling me that all of us are equal. That is why you are in my land. If you are not treating me like a French citizen, am I really a French? So we should ask, I think the question should be very, very simple to ask.
It's quite clear. It's quite clear that a European who had come to Africa in the 1850s was not paying any hard tax. And the interesting thing about some of these laws that when I was reading them is that they say that if you stayed in a European style kind of house, you were not you were exempt from the taxation. But if you stayed in the African styled hut and structure of a house, you were then supposed to pay the tax. What I see there is a deliberate way of dismantling the African culture, of dismantling the African identity, of dismantling the African ideology and mindset. Because if you were not taxed for staying in a European styled kind of house, then you were treated as an elite. You were treated as someone who's knowledgeable, someone who's civilized. But if you continue to stay in your traditional house, you were treated as an uncivilized person, who was then supposed to be taxed. And who was benefiting from this money? Remember, the First World War, the Second World War, Britain got involved in the Second World War and incurred debts that had to do with those wars. So the money that was being collected in Africa from oppressing the natives is the money that was given back, was taken back to Europe, to Britain, to build Britain. It is the same money that was used to pay the taxes and the debts of Britain. So British civilization is built on the oppression, the blood, the suffering of the African native. That's exactly what it is. So Britain is an emblem of African suffering, of African pain, of African poverty, because the moment you were called to pay that hard tax, the moment you were called to pay the dog tax, the moment you were called to pay the cattle tax. Remember, our parents had cattle heads that exceeded 500, 700, some had even 1,000. So for each cow, for each beast that you owned, you were supposed to pay tax to the colonialist. For grazing, that same beast of yours on your land. So
Okay.
you.
Now, I have a question for you, Dr. Leslie. We are there. What we do in this podcast, in this chat, actually, is that we just reflect, we think, we share idea. Okay, now I'm thinking, that this colonialists, this European, this civilized European, they came to Africa, the uncivilized people. They were trying to teach them about law. I get it, fine. Now, how will they justify this ridiculous taxes that you have what was their justification? Let's put it that way.
You need to understand that these people used as the discussion is all about. It's about lawfare and warfare. So when you resisted them, and you resisted that kind of subjugation, that kind of dehumanization, that kind of belittling, that kind of disrespect, that kind of lack of respect for humanity. They used the barrel of the gun. You had to face the bullet. And as long as you could not resist the bullet, then you'll have to succumb to their laws, which were oppressive and targeted specifically to the native African. So there was a combination of the law and the bullet. So in their own mindset, it was justified to subjugate us because we were a people who were less human and were supposed to be subjugated. And that's the mentality that they have. You see, that's the mentality that they continue to embrace. A mentality that an African can never be equal to a European. It's absurd, and they continue to do that in terms of economic engagements. Look at the economic deals that they do. Look at all the business deals that they bring on board. It's never a 50-50 kind of relationship. It's a kind of relationship whereby they have to bring paper money to you in the form of foreign direct investment, and then they take the real value in terms of real gold, and they take it to their own countries. And in essence, they are here for the labor, but they do so in a clever way, where they give you an SUV that is sort of upmarket. They give you a house that is sort of upmarket. They send your kids to school, and they give you some allowances to make you feel important, and they give you a title. We don't want titles. We don't want those toys. We want our resources, and we want to be owners of our means. And the moment you try, by all means, to push that agenda, with the moment you try to push that mindset, they vilify you, they dehumanize you, they delegitimize you. That's what they did with Robert Mugabe. That's what they did with Zimbabwe. That's why they're imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe. It's because you cannot set an example whereby an African country can take its resources and champion their own destiny in terms of their food production, in terms of their means of production, in terms of running their own economy. So if you do that, then they use lawfare. The US Congress set out 2 bills under Zidera, sanctions, and imposed sanctions using those bills. So in other words, in their own Congress, in their own parliament, it's justified to craft that kind of law which prohibits the Zimbabwean government from trading with anyone, which prohibits the Zimbabwean state-owned enterprises from engaging in business with anyone in the world, as long as that person has got some interest of some sort with the US. Those people are prohibited from engaging in business with the Zimbabwean state-owned enterprises. And for what country has ever survived without state-owned enterprises? None. Because your people then are left vulnerable to capitalists. They're left vulnerable to these profiteering people. Your workers are underpaid. They work in conditions that are not proper. This is the kind of mindset that we want and we need to fight against, and we need to make sure that our people are conscientized to understand that we are not against in any way. We are not against with any European person or any white person for that matter. We're against a system that thinks that the African is less human. We're against a system that considers the African less thinking. We're against a system that imposes European economics on the African continent to benefit Europeans at the expense of Africans. We're against that system which seeks to manage the African resources for the benefit of Europeans at the expense of Africans. Why must we be dictated in this time and age by a capitalist dictatorship that comes in the name of job creation and foreign direct investment at the expense of our own people, to pass neoliberal policies that benefit the same people at the expense of our own African people? It's quite a sad situation that we have, my brother. But we need to make sure that we are not prisoners of war. And how do we do that? We start by making sure that we free ourselves mentally. And also an interesting thing that we need to look at is that you will need to understand that when our forefathers were fighting for the liberation, they were fighting for one man, one vote. They are not the ones who thought about that idea of one man, one vote. It was a colonial law that was promulgated by the colonial governments in those countries, but they were favoring the minority at the expense of the majority. So the majority was not allowed to vote because they knew that if there was one man, one vote, obviously the majority would vote in their people in and vote them out. So our people, our leaders, they went to the bush to fight in order for one man, one vote. Yes, it was a good thing, but it was not supposed to end there. When they had fought enough, and the colonialists realized that there is no way now we can continue to resist this majority rule by the African child, by the natives. What we now need to do is that we need to make sure that we take charge of the component called the organs of the state. You see the organs of the state. You have the executive, you have the legislature, and then you have the judiciary. Now, you need to understand that most constitutions, they empower the judiciary and empower the legislature at the expense of the executive. It is a good thing in democracy to make sure that the executive are always put in check and they are made accountable, and they are made to account for the policies and how they manage the resources of the country. But you need to understand that in lawfare, these two branches, the legislature and the judiciary, have been instrumental in making sure that the political decisions that have to do with the empowering of the African child are not easy to sail through. And it's a fact. Look across Africa, you'll see the trend. It's always whenever you want to pass a policy to empower your people by giving them land, the constitution tells you that land is a property right. You cannot just take it. And the judiciary will rule against you because it's upholding the constitution, and the judiciary is justified in doing so. But the question that comes to mind is, whose constitution or whose laws, who is benefiting from those laws? That's the question.
Right. That's the question. And now, there is also another question, which is, now let's say we are independent states in Africa, even though I really do believe that there are very few countries in Africa that are really independent, if there is even a single one, no?
Mm-hmm.
Are we still upholding the colonial setup, or have we evolved our own system? Because I want to believe that, let's even believe that there was nothing in Africa before the European came. Let's even accept that that is the situation. Now, we have been living with the European system for how many years now? Is it favoring us? Are we continuing with it? Are we ready to fight for our own? Or are we just like cattle, just waiting for them to come and cut off our neck? What is the next step now? Are we just comfortable, or are we thinking, because this one will be an error, that one day the European will realize that, okay, these people have suffered enough. Now let's set them free. Because if we are thinking that, it will never happen. Not in 1,000 years. So are we still following the model that the colonialists set up, which, like I've always said in this podcast, they set it up looking at Africa as a satellite, meaning Africa was not considered as a state, as a system. It was only responding to their system. And even this, we can understand it. If you have slaves, if you have prisoners, you don't want them to be free. It doesn't depend on the European or the Westerner to set African free. We cannot, that is too expensive as an opinion to hold. So do we have a strategy? Do we have a plan to be free?
A plan to be free is there. A plan is to be free. Apparently, the plan to be free is there, but in a few individuals who are here and there, scattered here and there. And as I mentioned before, that lawfare, it is the use of the law and the organs of state, the institutions that are supposed to be independent as a pocket knife. So what happens is that when you stand up today and you talk about making sure that your people are free and your country is free, you are vilified by the same law. You are delegitimized. you are considered a corrupt individual, you are character assassinated, with the media playing a major role on that. This is a phenomenon that we have witnessed over the years. This is a situation that we have witnessed over the years with all African leaders that have stood up and said we need to make sure that we empower our people. We need to make sure that our people are capacitated to be free economically and to charter their way in the economic space without being dictated to by the colonialists. Now, there is a deliberate thing that is meant to make sure that our people are free, but we need to understand the context first. All African countries, when they were at the brink of political independence, they had to go through negotiations. I will take an example of Zimbabwe in this case. In 1977, 1978, 1979, there were conferences and conferences that were taking place. What were the conferences? I want to use Zimbabwe as a case study at the moment because it's quite vivid, and it's the best example that we can use now. An example of what colonialists can do to a country which decides to be economically independent and reverse the affront of the colonialism, the subjugation that is imposed by colonialism, etc., etc. Now, the political parties in Zimbabwe had armies at the armed wing. That is, we had the ZAPU, which had its own armed wing, which was called ZIPRA. We had ZANLA, which was the armed wing of ZANU. So these two combined to form what was called the Patriotic Front, for the sake and the purposes of negotiation, and for the purposes of the ceasefire and the charting of the way forward after independence. So who was the major obstacle in the negotiations for the independence of Zimbabwe as they tried to come up with a new constitution? It was Britain. Britain did not want a complete transference of power in the new Zimbabwe. They did not want the new government to form its own independent military, to form its independent intelligence structure, to form its independent security organs. Why? Because they knew that once these people manage to have transfer of power, they will be in a position to defend their policies militarily if the situation required them to do so. Now, the other obstacles that they came with was the land question. Remember, these people went to war for 17 years. They were not fighting for the right to walk in a street. They were not fighting for the right to drink certain beer. They were fighting for land. They were not fighting for jobs. They were fighting for land, because that is what was taken forcibly from them, and that is what prompted the resistance and the revolution in the first place. Now, let's come to the Lancaster House Constitution. The Lancaster House Constitution, what does it say? It has a clause on land, and it says the Zimbabwean land cannot be redistributed for the next coming 10 years after independence. In other words, the government has to embark on what is called a willing buyer, willing seller basis. So the government has to buy land. Imagine the African has to buy his own land from a colonialist. And the Patriotic Front, that is Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo, they said, no, we cannot buy land. We cannot buy our own land because it was taken by force of arms. We never sold our land. Where did the Europeans get that same land that you want us to buy from them? So the Thatcher government, the British government said, under Margaret Thatcher, we will avail the funds for you to buy the land. Now, then you see, land was commodified. Lawfare was used to commodify land. Now, land which was forcibly taken from an African for free is now being regarded as a property. Hence, it's now a property for the colonialist kith and kin. Hence, it cannot be just taken for free, because if you do that, you have violated the property rights of humanity. Now they are citing the UN Declaration of Human Rights that espouses and protects and preserves the rights to property. But the African does not have rights, by the way. You must remember that, according to the colonialist mindset, because that same land was taken for free, for nothing. But now the African, after fighting for 17 years, he has to buy the land that he has fought for 17 years. Why were they fighting for in the first place if they could just buy the land? They could have just bought the land instead of fighting, and avoid all the death and the pain and the suffering and the pillaging and the bombing that they experienced at the Smith minority settler regime, which was backed by the British government. So you see now, the the Patriotic Front did not agree to the matter, but the frontline states had endured enough of supporting these guys for 17 years fighting the war. They were also tired. Their economies were getting under strain. So they said, let's settle for this compromise. And then they settled for the compromise. 10 years went by. Still, Mugabe government and the Mugabe regime is asking the British government to make the funds available so that they can pay for that land as per their agreement. You know what they did? Because the law that they crafted is to protect and preserve them, it has no consequences on their part. They did not honor their side of the story. And you know what then Mugabe did in 1997, 1999, in 2000? He said, okay, now because we have the majority, we have the legislative power, we have the executive power, we are amending that same constitution to make and pave way for our government to take that land without any form of compensation to the white man. And that's what they did exactly. So you need to understand that these institutions that we inherited, like as per your questions the question that you asked earlier on, we need to make sure that we take that which is good, adapt it, and modify it as per our circumstances. Like Kwame Nkrumah said this thing years back. The greatest Pan-Africanist, he said, these same people will come and recolonize us in the form of investment. And he was right, because we see that all over Africa and now. And then he said, whatever they have in terms of their models, take that which is good, adapt it for your purposes, and leave that which is bad. That's exactly what Mugabe did. He took that which was good, he amended the constitution, used the 2/3 majority as the constitutional requirement, amended his constitution, and made sure that he takes the land. So taking land without compensation was legal in Zimbabwe in 2000, but it was illegal to the powers that be. And the powers that be, you know what they did? They imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe because they said Zimbabwe is violating the property rights. Whose property rights again? The minority white farmers. So in other words, the Zimbabwean constitution, which was voted in by the majority of Zimbabweans, was not meant to protect the majority of Zimbabweans. It was meant to protect the minority white settler farmers. So this is the struggle that we have in Africa. Now, Zimbabwe has been under those sanctions. Yes.
No, because the thing is really very interesting, the argument, no, that, when you read the notices, maybe you are reading a BBC article on the topic that the Zimbabwe have seized the land, they have denied land to white farmer. Of course, it will appear, this devilish man, this wicked man, this wicked Zimbabwe man, why is he doing this? So he wants people to suffer. And then the story will go on, regurgitated in CNN, in Fox News. Okay, you see, Zimbabwe are suffering because they have a man who doesn't know what he's doing. The story can really be told in a way that it can make uh, maybe that is, you take a gun and shoot somebody, then you will tell a story that make it believe that man just shoot himself. Because people are really very terrible, no? Now, what I want to say here is that then I will, of course, put it as a question to you later on is, I think the Europeans are very clever when they do these things, no? Because if they were to just go there one day and want to take the land, they will not succeed. But as a clever people with a clear objective, this is what I think Africa should also learn from. They take the time to study you. They begin to take you down one piece at a time. That is a group up against one or few individuals, and they will succeed because it's a law of numbers. Now, how is it disadvantageous to the African people? Because they pick only few people and they empower these people a lot. And these people look at themselves as, we are better than every other person. Of course, they are going to allow you to enjoy even to the end of your life. But remember, we are not the objective. The objective is to use you to get to something else. But how can you benefit from me? Reading from the line that you just mentioned of Kwame Nkrumah, is that you should know that this is a strategy, that this is a game. How is it beneficial to you and the people that you are part of? Because note, the European system, the Western system, will never work for your interest. It will never before and never will it happen again. Because they are here to survive. If your own is just to enrich yourself as an individual or your immediate family or a small group, and that is what you see as their benefit, as your benefit in the bargain, you need to think again. Because by the time they want to claim that, which of course you are part of as a bargain, they are going to claim your entire people, and your people are going to suffer for the little reward that you get. Of course, they are going to give you the reward, but think far ahead. If we do this, we will survive. We have the numbers. We are not just stupid people. But the point is that in most of the cases, very few of us are enticed to take what belongs to all of us and then we sell it out. Now, from your thinking, because as a historian, do you think that because like I said before, we are not stupid people, just stupid, like we also have very high-thinking people. Do you think African historian, African intelligent people are looking for a way out? Sincerely looking for a way out? Because we are in a quagmire. In this quagmire, we, the African people, must find a way out or we are going to remain here. So do you think Africans, if you are, by this, I mean, if you are a historian, you should be writing the way out. If you are a singer, you are somebody who's performed, you should be performing the way out. If you are thinking, you are a strategist, you should be strategizing the way out. By that, I don't mean only for you. Help the people that are near to you. Do you see Africans doing this? Because if we don't have any hope.
I do not see Africa doing this at the moment. The challenge is that the so-called celebrated professors are Western trained. The so-called celebrated technocrats, they are Western trained as well. They're educated in Oxford, Harvard. They think that if you are educated in Oxford or Harvard, then you are the creme de la creme of the world, which is a fallacy at the end of the day. Our economists, they have Western economics principles that they are learning, which are of no value to Africa at the end of the day. They're of no value to our people. They are not there to capacitate our people. They are not there to benefit our people. They are not there to benefit the country. And these policies, they always come with scaling down, cutting jobs, cutting costs to please the IMF. and you find our own leaders, they celebrate being considered a certain to be in a certain standard by a Western body. In other words, it's an indirect acknowledgement or acceptance of inferiority in a way, because why would you want to be affirmed by a European for being an African? Why should we be celebrating when we see a fish swimming? A fish is meant to swim, so we are not supposed to be celebrating and ululating and jumping around and say, yo, we have achieved because the fish is now swimming. It's meant to swim. That's how it was designed to be. We are our own determiners and of our own destiny, but unfortunately, it is the university education that is flawed. And this I can say with all the all confidence that the university system is designed in a way not to channel thinkers, especially at the lower degrees levels, because the undergrad programs, they're designed to make you think in a certain way. They're designed to make you be employable, be an employee. Who's employee? I wonder. It's not designed to make you think outside of the box. It's not designed to make you to be a thinker, to be an innovator in the African context. For instance, why must I learn all the African animals in a foreign language? Why? As if our language doesn't have the names for those animals. Why must I learn all the plants in a foreign language using a book that was written by someone who's somewhere in Europe? When we stay with the animals, we grow up with these animals day in, day out. Our grandfathers knew how to manage wildlife. That's why the European and the capitalist and the colonialist found animals on this planet. It's because we were good wildlife managers. Now, all of a sudden, we must be employing principles that come from someone who stays where there are no animals in Harvard, but came for 2 weeks to study animals in Africa and came up with theories. Now those theories are now the Bible of world conservation. It's absurd. To me, it doesn't make sense at all. And it doesn't make sense in totality because we've been managing this wildlife for centuries. That's why we have them. And in Europe, they don't have them. Now, so whose principles work better in terms of wildlife conservation? The European or the African way? So now,
okay, please go.
Yeah. So now it appears that I want to give you a simple example. You asked a question: are we deliberately trying, by all means, to make sure that we free ourselves and we make sure that we become the owners of our own destiny? Are we making that deliberate move? No, we are not. Why? Because you find an African professor teaching an African class full of natives, teaching them wildlife, teaching them biology, and he himself is speaking a native language. Maybe let's say he speaks Swahili. The entire class that he's teaching speaks Swahili, but he's teaching the subject in English. So what it means is that his students must first learn English before they learn the science. Already there is subjugation there. Already there is a disadvantage there. Why not just learn your science in your Swahili, like they do in Britain? They learn science in English, which is their native language. Why not do the same? So this is a starting point. So we need to make sure that we decolonize our educational system. We decolonize this system of ours that we have. The challenge is not that our professors do not really want to be free or do not want to capacitate and equip their students. No, the challenge is they don't have a choice because they are also Western trained. Look at our economists, look at our finance ministers. What policies do they push forward? Are they pushing African policies when it comes to economics? Are they pushing policies that benefit the African child? It's also not their fault. It's their educational system that is westernized. So they tend to impose Western ideas, Western principles on African principles and African scenarios, which do not work in the African context. Hence, you have a lot of structural adjustment program. I'll give you an example of the Zimbabwean scenario. Zimbabwe espoused and took up a policy that is called ESAP, the Economic Structural Adjustment Program. What happened after that Economic Structural Adjustment Program? People were poorer than they were before. Many people lost their jobs. Did it work for the Zimbabwean economy? No, it didn't. How many people had access to education? How many people have access to education now at the moment after implementing all those policies? So you come to understand that our leaders, when they were fighting for the liberation struggle, they espoused socialism, socialist principles and norms. Of course, it's not all socialist principles that would work in our context, but some of the principles do work. It's not capitalism in its entirety that is evil. No, some of the capitalist principles, they work. A mixed economy would do. But you realize that most of what they preached when they were at war, what they preached when they were fighting the war, has evolved greatly into something completely different that is divergent from the principles that they were preaching and espoused in the beginning. You know, African leaders are very benevolent leaders. They're magnanimous. They forgive people who don't deserve their forgiveness. They forgive people who have never even asked for their forgiveness. They are so much worried about getting acclamation, approbation, and approval from Western countries, and for to what end, you wonder? Every African president that has come in after gaining independence has preached reconciliation, but the reconciliation has been to the disadvantage of the African and the benefit of the European, because for the European it was life as usual, business as usual, because he still owned 87% of the land. He still owns 87% of the land. He still owned 80% of the economy. He still owns 87% of the economy. But now the African child has to understand that his leader is a peace-loving leader, is so loving and caring, such that he has to forgive. But forgiveness does not mean that you must not address the colonial injustices.
This will lead me to a question that I really must ask you, which has to do with anyway, before I get to that question, what has to do with why the international body? Because when all these things are happening, it's not that there are no international body, international big conventions, no? The Geneva Convention, all those beautiful things that our academy would like to quote, no? The French Convention, the Paris Treaty, the Rome Treaty. Were this treaty, this convention, not aware that Africa will be dispossessed of their land by their people? Why do they never come up to defend Africa? Why? Anyway, I'm lack of words. Tell me, why are this international convention not coming up to defend Africa when they are being dispossessed of their land and properties?
It is the very fact that how those conventions, how those international institutions are constituted, that is problematic in the first place. You must understand the principle behind the constitution of those international institutions. I would speak of The Hague, for instance. Have you ever seen any other leader apart from an African leader being at The Hague, being charged with international crimes of international war crimes and crimes against humanity? Have you ever seen a European president being there? We have seen Britain and the US. They went into Afghanistan. They went into Iraq. They went into Afghanistan. They claimed that Afghanistan had weapons of mass destruction. Tony Blair came out testifying that he had been lied to by his intelligence. Did you see him being dragged to the Hague? No. So these institutions, they're meant for African leaders. It's as simple as that. They're meant for African leaders. They're not meant for the powers that be. If you would revisit the last speech that was made by Robert Mugabe when he was the African Union chairperson, he called to the previous Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, and he talked to him about the democratization of the United Nations Security Council. How many years has that man been clamoring for the democratization of the UN Security Council, together with these peers, the likes of Hugo Chavez from Venezuela? Lots and lots and lots and lots of times, many times, they've been clamoring for that, but it never happens. Why? Because the United Nations on its own, the UN Security Council on its own, has not been democratized to make sure that it also takes on board African countries. Why? Because African countries, if they are given that opportunity they are the majority and they have the resources, and if they are given that chance, they would veto certain decisions in the interest of their own people. Let's look at Gaddafi. What happened to him? Look at Gaddafi, the Libya before Gaddafi and Libya after Gaddafi. It's a failed state now. It's a very insecure place to be. It's very unsafe to be. It's chaotic. It's now a war zone. But when Gaddafi was there was peace in that country. Of course, he had his flaws as a leader, but he made sure that his people owed nothing to the IMF, who owed nothing to the World Bank. His people benefited from the oil that was being mined in their own country. And look at it now. It's a failed state. It's a sad situation. To sum it up, when it comes to to issues that matter, the international bodies are mute, they are silent, they are quiet, but they only make noise when it's the reverse, when it's the African country that is trying to address colonial injustices, because they know what is at stake. If Zimbabwe becomes a successful program, a successful example, all African countries, they then say we are going to take up our land. What will happen to American and European civilization? It will come to an end, because if all African countries take their mineral resources, where will Anglo mine? Where will these big corporations mine? Where will these big companies mine? To name but a few. We need to understand that these companies, they contribute to the economies and the GDPs of all African countries. They are a necessity, they are needed. But it must be the country's policies to make sure that whenever these investors come in, they come in on a 50-50 basis. They also need to make sure that they benefit their own people from that investment. And
All right,
it
now,
brings
okay, now I'm going to start thinking again, in that let's look at it from the point of view of business, no? The Europeans,
yes.
they are advanced in terms of technology, in terms of acquisition of data and education and all that. Will the European economy simply fail if they trade 50-50 with Africa? What is the danger to the United States, to Europe, if they were to trade 50-50 with Africa in terms of resources, and not only natural resources, because this economy also depends on human resources from Africa. We never say it. The immigrants are just coming to Europe, and these are criminal. It's a lie. The European economy need these Africans that are coming from the Sahara. You may never hear them say that, but that is the reality. So the question really is, what do the European and the American economies start to lose if they were to do real business? By that I mean, I give you 50 You give me 50. We negotiate. You are not the one from Washington telling me how much I should sell my crude oil. I tell you, this is how much I want to sell it. You don't like it, go buy somewhere else. We are not even near there in Nigeria. If a system like that were to be in place, what do they stand to lose?
They don't necessarily lose anything at the moment. At the moment, they will still make profits, and they will still profiteer, and they will still be viable and be able to make as much money as they are making at the moment. But you need to understand one thing, that the imperialists think in decades, in centuries. The African thinks in 5 years. That's the challenge that we have. The challenge we have is that the African tends to think in 5 years, because they're thinking of a 5-year term. When am I going to be re-elected? How am I going to make sure that I get re-elected? But the imperialist thinks in centuries. They know at the moment they won't lose anything, but in the long run, the African countries will become independent in terms of running and managing those same resources, and that is the situation that they do not want. A situation whereby they have to bargain. They want a situation whereby they seem to be doing Africa a favor. They seem to be doing you a favor, then they can get that preferential treatment. That's the thing. It's all about leverage. For them, leverage is more important than anything else. So we need to understand that Africa has the capacity, but unfortunately, Africa doesn't know that they do have this capacity. Because when we start to argue about these matters, when we start to stand our own ground and talking about these issues and the capacity that we have as a people, it is the clever blacks that will come on board and say, no, how will we manage this? How will we sell this? You see, I was talking about the Western economics. We have the real deal. The investors come with paper money. We have the real deal. We have the mineral, which is the real money. So we need to come to a situation whereby we negotiate on a fair scale. Let's be fair to each other. Let's treat each other equally as humanity. Let's treat each other as brothers and sisters. America needs Zimbabwe as Zimbabwe needs America. America needs South Africa as South Africa needs America. The same with Britain, the same with Australia, the same with any other European country. So let it be on a fair footing. Let it not be exploitative. Let it not be based on taking advantage of the weaker country or the smaller country to make huge profits, which you could still make even if you were fair. So what we calling upon is fairness in everything. Let's be equal in everything. We are all human beings, so let's treat ourselves as such. When it comes to investment, we do not just want Africans to be the employees. We also want the Africans to be the owners of those means of production. So we are not saying we dispense with capitalism altogether. No, let it be a mixed economy, whereby in some key economic sectors, the government has the stake, because it has to do with the security of the nation. That is your energy production, that is your certain minerals that are strategic, your platinum, your uranium, your cobalt, your diamonds. The nation has to have a stake in that. It must not be something that is completely in there. For instance, energy production cannot be in the hands of independent private hands. The government has to have a stake on that, because it's strategic in terms of security. So in all those things, there must be an African model which makes sure that the safety and the security of the country is safeguarded, whilst the economy of the country is enhanced, making sure that the government plays its critical role of providing a role whereby business can do their business in a conducive environment. And now when we're talking about business, we're talking about all these big companies as well as native Africans as small businesses. They must be given a chance to get into the economic space. And let's coexist in that way. Is that difficult to ask?
To ask if I'm looking at a civilization, looking at a mindset coming from Europe, which appear to be preaching fairness and justice, you wouldn't think that is too much to ask, no? Because you are the one that is telling me about justice. I'm not telling you treat me fair. I'm like saying what you are saying, but I don't think even in the next 100 years there is any real political strategy in Europe to do that. But we don't really need to expect that, because that is not going to happen anyway, because we're in a war front. It has always been like that, you know. Maybe when the civilization change, by the time the human being involved more, we might realize that we need to treat each other better, no? But until this moment, we are still like fighting. Because just take an example of the United States, for example. The United States is the one that is going around in the world talking to people about justice, about peace, about fairness. But look at how they treat their own citizens. You know, now they have two justice systems in one country. A policeman, you know, when you watch an American film, I will say, because honestly speaking, before I start to know of how they treat black people in America, I used to have a lot of respect for the mentality of the policing. That you call a police that is a problem, they just come immediately to rescue you, to rescue the situation. But in the United States, what do you see? The police have become the executor. They go to kill people. The police are not supposed to kill people. You were supposed to arrest a person. But I tell you honestly and sincerely, these police officers in the United States were well trained. They know that this is the job. The job was not for you to become the judge. That's the job was not for you to become the judge. Like, you suspect that somebody was a criminal. You don't go there and execute the person. That makes you a judge. You are not a judge. Your job was to find evidence, get the person arrested. Your job has ended. You transfer the case to the person needs to have the possibility of defending himself in the law court. That is the way it should be. But in the United States, you see a policeman shooting somebody that don't even have any people other than the African American. No. This tells you that even the United States, that system, that experiment, have failed their own citizens. So they don't have the right to go around the world and start preaching justice, because you don't even have justice in your country. So looking at the European coming to Africa, that question is a simple one. Let's treat each other fairly. It's a very simple one. Now, talking of fairness, I'm talking of treating each other with fairness, I'm looking at the African wildlife now, because I think that is something we need to also look into. Because when you were explaining before, you speak to the fact that Africans have been dealing with this animal for very many years, for thousands of years before the European ever stepped their foot in Africa. And this is evidence. It is evidence in our art, in our culture, in our life, in our food, in our collective existence. Go to any painting, even in the cave in Africa, you will see that there is a direct relationship between the animal and the human being. What about the representation? Go to Egypt, for example, go to Zimbabwe, go to the Nubia, go to, there is a culture called the No culture in central Nigeria, dating back to about 3,000 years. Go to the representation. This is not the first time that Africans are getting in contact with the animal, because we know that all of us are part of the collective existence. So the question really is, who is in charge? I'm talking of today, of the animals in Africa, talking of wildlife.
That's a very important question, because I think the ownership of wildlife tends to be depends on the region and the country that you are in, and the policies and the laws of that country, whether the laws of that country have been decolonized enough or not. In some countries, um, the majority of the wildlife is in private hands. It's in private hands, and it's in the form of safaris, um, hunting camps, the tourism industry, and it rakes in billions. They tell you it rakes in billions and billions of dollars, but whose billions are they? Yes, they contribute to the GDP, but who's raking in the billions? Who's benefiting from that wildlife? How do you tell me in a country, an African country, where the natives have no access to wildlife whatsoever? Someone who came on a ship in 1652 has got all the wildlife, owns the rhinoceros, they own the buffaloes, they own the giraffes, they own the impalas. Where did they get those impalas? Did they bring the impalas on the ship to Africa? Did they ship them from Europe to Africa, those elephants? That's a question that we need to ask. I know it's an easy question. It's a very difficult question. It's an uncomfortable question, but we need to ask. When we're talking about our natural resources, which includes our land, it also includes our wildlife. There needs to be a decolonization when it comes to that sector of wildlife management. In some countries like Zimbabwe, you find that they've got the largest herd if I'm not mistaken, they have the largest herd of elephants in the world, which is above 80,000, and it's wholly owned by the government. So you see the policies of a country. In the case of Zimbabwe, wildlife, yes, independent players can own wildlife, but it is the government that predominantly owns the wildlife. But in some countries, you don't see the same thing. It's predominantly a white minority who owns the wildlife. The question now that comes is, where did they get the wildlife? And whenever a black person is seen on a wildlife ranch or wildlife reserve, is deemed to be a poacher. But this is the primary stockholder of that resource, which is a sad situation indeed that we're having. And now we've got organs. You're talking about institutions. We have institutions like CITES, the Convention on Biodiversity, the World Wildlife Fund, etc., etc. Whose principles do they employ in advocacy, in trying to influence the policy when it comes to wildlife management? Whose policies are they pushing forward? Imagine a country like Zimbabwe has got 80,000 elephants. They are above the stocking rate. They are above the capacity which they have to maintain and conserve them. And they say we need to make to use that same resource to earn the monies for us to be able to manage them properly. And it's a problem. CITES will come in and say, no, it will encourage the trade in ivory and cause poaching, blah blah blah. You name it. But the same country that is supposed to be managing all that wildlife with no resources because of sanctions, with crippling resources because of sanctions, has to bear the brunt. And who has to bear the biggest brunt and the biggest expense of that elephant roaming around? It is the poor native African who stays in a village where the animal roams around, who has to experience the animal, the crops being raided, their areas being destroyed by the same animal because of overstocking. So our wildlife needs to be reconsidered. As we consider the land issue, let's reconsider the wildlife issue. It's our wildlife, it's our resources. It has to be 50-50. Again, the majority Black, Native Africans must have a stake in the wildlife sector. It's their resource, which was forcibly taken away from them by the colonialists. So it must not be a matter of debate. It must be a matter of engagement. Because either way, it's going to happen. It might not happen in our generation, but it's going to happen. It definitely is going to happen. That thing is going to happen. We can't stop it, but it's going to happen. So rather do it now and do it in the proper way. Engage in a form of engagement, not in a form of defiance, not in the form of resistance, not in the form of arrogance, because it will not work out.
Well, you see, if you watch a film, because probably this is the second question I will ask you on the wildlife, then we will move on to land and also other resources, because that is really also very important. We can talk about the looting of the Nigerian resources, for example, by the Nigerian politicians, and sometimes it appears that these people are this wicked that they just begin to do this, but it's not really like that. Because we need to also try to understand, how did they even become how did they become in position of that of authority? Because it will appear that okay, Sani Abacha just took over as the Nigerian head of state. That is the news. That is what we see. But what we don't see is the making, the process. Who is supporting you? How did it happen? Then if it siphon the money and go hide it in France or in Switzerland, this is not a mistake. This has been part of the agenda. And that is the one we see also. We are talking of the cash. There are the resources that we don't know of, the Nigerian people don't know of, that are being looted away from their country continuously. You see, when I was going to Nigeria in 2013, yes, I was inside Air France. Air France, you know, it's a very big, a big plane, no? The majority of the people that were going to Nigeria with me, because it was a direct flight, were Europeans. And at the same time, we were talking, Europeans don't come to Nigeria is unsafe and unsafe. Unsafe for whom? Because if you go to the Niger Delta, they fool everywhere, no? They are also doing business. But the question at the end of the day is, what kind of business are you really doing there? Because we in Europe, we are looked upon as if we are criminals, you know, in most of the cases. But you are also criminal in our land. Nobody talks about that. How many Europeans are inside the Nigerian prisons? They are sane. They never commit any crime. Is that the reason? If you go to a European prison, it's full of Africans. Anyway, I don't even want to be trading. I don't want to be trading on that. But what actually I wanted to say related to wildlife is that if you watch a typical wildlife film, of course, you will see the some Africans there actually, whether you are looking at the safari, looking at South Africa or Zimbabwe. What the impression that I have is that the Africans there are employed. But who is really employed there? What I really am driving at is that, are we really in charge of these resources that we call our own? Or like I was saying before, we are just like helping the European to maintain these resources for them. If we haven't changed the law, the system that we had during the colonial system, of course, where everything, including the Africans, were just looked upon as resources for them, then I find it difficult to see that we're actually in charge of even our resources of the animal. So that is where I want to see your comment.
Yeah, no, we at the moment when it comes to our wildlife, we are not fully in charge at the large scale as Africans. But I think it's a process that will finally make us in charge of our wildlife resources, because we have these so-called independent players. I'll give you an example of a certain project. I'll not give the name of the project. That project is in Zimbabwe, and I asked the people about. In fact, I asked the people if I could visit and go see the animals that were there, just to see the animals that were there. it's an NGO. They told me that if I'm to come there and see the animals there, I must pay, and I must make a booking and pay for me to go and see the animals there. And it made me think. And there are a lot of such projects that are around, even here in South Africa, even in Zimbabwe, and even in Botswana as well, and across Africa as well. If you want to go to those certain projects, you must pay. And you pay a European to go to a project that is in Africa, that is dealing with African animals. So a native African pays to go and see African animals to a European.
In fact, that is actually the question. That's actually the point. How did he come to the point that the European are the guardians of the African elephants, whereas the African have to take permission from them before they see it? I don't understand the transition. How did he get to that point?
It's called lawfare, the same lawfare that we're talking about. You understand that laws to do with wildlife, they were promulgated during the colonial period. Most of those laws have not been purely decolonized, 100% decolonized, to make sure that we deal with the segregative nature of those laws, which give privilege and precedence to a European person at the expense of an African person who is the stockholder of that resource and has to bear the brunt of that resource. Go to many nature reserves, be it in South Africa, be it in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, maybe it could be a different scenario altogether. In Botswana, also, it might be a different scenario altogether. But predominantly in South Africa, most of the game reserves, look at the ecologists there, look at the managers there, and then look at the ancillary or support staff, the general hand staff. You'll get the picture of what I'm talking about. The general hand are the African natives, whilst those who really have to do with the management of the resource are of European descent. And that's a situation that has been normalized because of centuries of disenfranchisement of the African child, but it has to change, and the change has to come now. And even when it comes to those laws that deal with safaris and this international hunting business, it does rake in thousands and millions to host countries, but it has to be changed to make sure that the African themselves have a stake in that industry. They take charge of their natural resources, so to speak. Yeah, of course, it must not be a situation whereby we completely dispossess of the European. No, but it has to be something that is fair, something that takes on board the African as well, and make sure that fairness in every aspect is espoused. At one point in time, Robert Mugabe did speak of the safaris, and he was talking about coming after the safaris. And to a certain extent, some African natives did settle themselves in certain safari areas. And I'm sure there might be processes and means of also getting a stake. Whenever that happens, we are told about our Western trained economists that it will have an impact on our tourism industry and it will affect the GDP of the country. But when we really get to the bottom of the matter, who is really benefiting from this tourism? Is it the native African? Is it the government? Is it private individuals? And who are these private individuals? These are matters that we need to be starting to interrogate now. These are issues that we need to start to be looking at now. These are issues that we need to start to be making sure that we make our people conscious, because these are their resources. It's their heritage. It's their birthright. It's not something that was imported. It's something that is within their country. It's a God-given natural endowment and resource, and hence has to be beneficial to the individual on the ground. These are not difficult things to ask for. He's simply asking for fairness. So our laws need to be looked at. those that had colonial connotations of giving a supremacist privilege to the other race must be decolonized, must be changed, must be sanitized to make sure that they take on board everyone, irrespective of their color, creed, race, tribe, and ethnicity. That's what we want as Africans. We are not fighting individuals. We, even in our liberation struggle, we were never fighting individuals. We were fighting a system that deliberately, structurally, systematically disenfranchised the native African at the benefit of a European who came from Europe to dispossess. That has to come to an end.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Leslie. Now, of course, we're moving towards the end of the podcast because, yes, we have spent a lot of time here looking at different issues of it. Of course, we didn't spend enough time on the warfare, really, but that would be a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Now, I'm beginning to think that this issue should have been taken up by our intelligent lawyers and law experts, no? Because
yes,
I want to believe again, I want to pretend that we are independent. Okay, I just want to pretend
yes,
that African countries are independent. If we are
mm-hmm.
independent, it means we are free to think freely, you know? And if we are thinking
yes,
freely, it should be abnormal that certain things are done the way they are done in Africa, like we have discussed up to this point, no? That our resources are not in our hand legally. Legally speaking, some of the resources are not in the control of the African people. That should be absurd, sort of. But now
yes,
you don't expect somebody who have no knowledge of even the European standard of the law to explain this. And talking of
yes,
the law, I just want to point on something in parenthesis, you know, that if
yeah,
really it shouldn't be right that the European are the one bringing the law to us, then we don't have any law. It's not true. We also have our
yeah,
law. But let's even pretend that
yes,
we don't have any law. Let's even use the European law this time.
yes,
Our law expert, people who have studied law, who are very intelligent, because there are people that are very intelligent in Africa in terms of law and things related to law.
yes.
Well, can't they do something legally? We're talking legally, no? Because now, what did I like about Nelson Mandela is that he used the game against the people and was able to get some things, no? You know, he was the guy we talked
Yeah.
about the other time, no? Because
Yeah.
it's the same thing that Krumah was saying. You need to understand the system, then use it for your interest.
Yes.
Because now, if we're talking of lawfare, that law is being used to dispossess African people, we need African people who are expert in the law to tell the people this is the game. We need to play the long game, game legally. How can we do that?
In as much as the law experts will come in, I'm not a law expert myself, but I do get to understand to a certain extent how the state operates. The state has got the judiciary, the state has got the executive and the legislature. This legislature, that's where we have the elected representatives of government in terms of constituencies. And these lawmakers, the legislature, are the lawmakers. They are the people who can amend a constitution. They are the people who can make amendments and put them forward for the people to give their input, and then it can be then taken to the executive, and it's made law. It's quite an easy process to do if our lawmakers are knowledgeable about the matters. The challenge that we have is that most people that are elected into being members of parliament are mostly people who are not knowledgeable about these matters that we're talking about. They have the power, they have the influence, but unfortunately they don't have the ideas. So I think in a way we need to have people who have the ideas to push the ideas to these lawmakers, such that these lawmakers can identify with these ideas and see how noble the ideas might be. They can probably maybe make adjustments, add to them, make subtractions, without distorting the idea altogether. And these things can simply be made law. It's as easy as that. You only need 2/3 majority in parliament, and then you can pass any law that you want to pass. Mugabe did it in 2000, and it worked very well. Majority of Zimbabweans got their land. And it can happen the same way in any other resource pertaining to any other resource. It's as simple as that. But you need to understand also that, remember, the colonialist is not sleeping. The colonialist is very much active. The colonialist is very much knowledgeable of the capabilities that we can have if we think in certain lines. So they try by all means to make sure that that's why you see that they tend to align with certain political parties, and these so-called opposition parties, in many times they tend to be influenced in terms of their ideology, in terms of their economics, in terms of their approach, in a way that tends to favor the person who's sponsoring them. You definitely need to make sure that you have principled politicians who stand their ground, who stand and believe in the empowerment of their people, who understand what is at stake, who understand that it's not about them and their families and money, it's about generations to come. And once we have such people with such ideas, we will begin to see a change in terms of the African dynamics, the African politics, which influences the economics. Politics plays a major role in economics of a country. And if we have the properly aligned, the properly thinking politicians, we will see the right changes in terms of our economics. We will see the development on the ground. We'll see the results being felt by the individual person on the ground. And when that starts to happen, we start to see that the African is becoming liberated, is becoming empowered. And that's a scenario that we need to see, that all fairness is done within the confines of our laws. But if the laws are not working for us, we have the 2/3 majority. Change them and make sure that they work for us. If you can't keep a law that doesn't work for you, why are you keeping it? To benefit who? You can't keep a law that disadvantages you. For what reason? For what purpose? Why then are you in government? You need to put laws that empower your people. Okay, you need to put laws that empower your people. Imagine the Zimbabwean land reform program was at a snail's pace for 10 years, for almost 15, if not 17 years, because they were respecting a law that was in the Lancaster House Constitution, a law that was against them. And they had to change that constitution to come up with the Zimbabwean constitution that benefit the African people, the Zimbabwean people with their context. You can't have something that is cooked up in Europe to work in Africa. It might work in certain areas, but in the larger aspect, in the larger part of it, it won't work. So this is the call that we need to make to our politicians. That's why we have technocrats. That's why we have universities. If we have proper professors who are not just there as armchair professors, they need to make sure that they come up with policies which they bring to the attention of the policymakers to finally be converted into laws, the laws of the country, the laws that will benefit our people. To our lawyers have got the expertise, they've got the intelligence. They need also to think outside the box and say, is our constitutional law applicable, beneficial, and of economic benefit to our people? Is it benefiting our people? Is it empowering our people? Is it giving justice to our people? Is it bringing stability and peace for our people? If not, they also have the means and channels which they can also pursue to make sure that the relevant laws that are relevant to their people, beneficial to their people, can be promulgated. It's not something that is very difficult to do. Of course, it can be a process, but it's something that can be happening. It's the same thing with the aspect of land in South Africa, where they are talking about there is this debate: should we take land without compensation? Should we take it with compensation? And it's been a process that is going to and fro, and we yet to see it coming to reality. We yet to see it materializing. But it must be a law that benefits their people, the majority of the African people, because that's the reason why they have been fighting for independence, such that their people can benefit. If you fought and your people are not benefiting, so why were you fighting? What were you fighting for? What was it that prompted you to fight in the first place if you're not going to implement the things that you fought for?
That is absolutely interesting. In fact, you are speaking to to the piece that I really think we must face now. In that now, if there is a war in a country, aren't we going to make new law in the interest of that war, the declaration of certain policies and all that? If there was a disease, a new outbreak of disease that probably lasts for some time, so that what actually I am saying now, you look at the 2011 attack in New York. There was after that were the anti-terrorism law that was made. No, what I'm saying is actually a conformity to what you're saying, that really it is possible to change this law. Because if it's not working for you, I don't know why are you keeping it.
Yeah.
Maybe, like you have said, we just elect incompetent people into the office. They don't know why they are there. So they just go there and fight every day, or how much I'm going to receive as a salary, how much I'm going to receive, the new girlfriend that I've got. Very stupid thing. That is why they are there.
Yeah.
Then we're not going to go anywhere. I give you an instance. Now, in Nigeria, we don't have light. For several years, there have been a debate on how do we get light in Nigeria. Now, say there is a law that, let's try different things, for example, because you can't know everything. No? Let's say, okay, let's give the state, each state, the possibility to go out, get your way of generating electricity, for example. Let's make this into a law, because in Nigeria, it's the federal government that have the law, that have the law for the light. No? So now let's give it to the state, so that the state will now generate their own light. And let's see, maybe one state can have the solution, the other state can then copy from that, for example. So I'm using that one just as an instance, no? Which means instead of keeping the colonial laws, which maybe might be good in some area, but if it is not good in the majority of it, why do we need to keep it? Because somebody will be thinking, okay, these are law, it cannot change them. But it is not true. You can change them, you can really change them.
Yeah.
And that leads me to another question, which is the role of African leaders in looting African resources. I will give you an instance.
Yeah.
When Sani Abacha, who was the military head of state of Nigeria at the time, news was coming out that this guy had also $1 trillion, I think more than $1 trillion naira in overseas. And a mathematician came up and said, this is the first time I'm hearing the word trillion. How did he manage to do this? This is the leader of a country where I was saying we don't have light. We don't need $1 trillion naira to fix the Nigerian lights. So just like Abacha, we have Babangida and many of them who have deliberately looted the country. They just suck a cow to a dry bone.
Yeah.
What is their role in it? Because we cannot blame everything on the European. I understand.
Yes.
I am not naive to the point that sometimes these guys, they are invited to US, to France, to Vatican, to see certain things, to sign certain law, to sign certain document and say, okay, yeah, you continue to keep it the way they are. I understand that.
Yeah.
But you are a human being. You are supposed to be representing your people. If you cannot even start to defend your people against other people, why are you there? So what is their role in this?
The issue of looting is a serious disease that we have in Africa, and it comes with corruption. We have a lot of corrupt leaders that make their way into the echelons of power, and they abuse their authority and their power in looting the critical mineral resources that we have in the country. And at times, it's not just about the actual looting or stealing of resources themselves. It also comes to also bringing in and partnering with certain individual companies, and for the benefit of an individual at the expense of the state. So this is the challenge that we have in Africa. We tend to have greedy leaders who have their interests and bellies in mind and don't care about the generality of the population of our country, of the people. And they play a major role in bleeding the country of its financial resources. They play a major role in bleeding the country of its mineral resources. They play a major role in bleeding the country of the proceeds from these mineral resources. For instance, they loot the resources, they smuggle the resources outside the country, and when they do so, they sell the resource probably on a black market or something like that. When they get the cash, what do? They bank in European banks, which is on its own a clear indication that they are saying we are not able, and they misrepresent the entirety of Africa to make people think that Africans cannot govern themselves, cannot manage their own resources themselves, to portray a picture that um, Africans are greedy and do not care about their people, which is not true, and which is not the actual principle that drives every African. There are some Africans who care about their people. There are some African leaders who care about the welfare of their own people and the generality of their own people. But such leaders are rare, they're very few, and do not usually make it to the position of power. Because you need to understand that also some of these foreign powers, they benefit from such corrupt leaders. Because such corrupt leaders, as long as they are benefiting, they can push policies that benefit those countries at the expense of their own people. And it's quite a sad situation that we have. It's a sad situation that we have in Africa. I remember the scenario of Mobutu Sese Seko. I'm not sure about this, but I heard at a point in time that he even borrowed the country some money. He said, "Oh, you are running out of money. I can borrow you from my own personal pocket." Where did he get the money to borrow his own country money, if he is a public servant and a civil servant for that matter? So these are issues that we are faced with in Africa all the time. The personal greediness of leaders is manipulated to make sure that the country is influenced in a certain way in terms of policy formulation by the powers that are interested in the resources of that country. And I personally don't know how such things can be prevented, but I know for a fact that it is the same people that elect these leaders into power. And it is the same people that can say enough is enough and elect the same leader out of power. And it's within the prerogative of the governed to make sure that they are governed by someone who's fit, someone who's upright, someone who doesn't have such tendencies of bidding the country to the highest seller. And it is those systems within their political parties to make sure that they get rid of such individuals who are corrupt to the core. And it is incumbent upon those political parties to make sure that if anyone is unpatriotic to the extent of partnering and selling the resources of the country to empower themselves and to enrich themselves, they must make sure that they get rid of the unpatriotic individual and put in someone who's more patriotic, and also put measures in place to make sure that such people are put to account and made to account for the riches and the certain policies that they make on behalf of the country. Of course, it's complicated in the African situation because of multiple factors, but I think it's possible. I always give an example of Botswana. If you look at Botswana, Botswana is one country that you can see is an emblem and an example of governance in Southern Africa. Just go there. You don't need to be told that this country is well governed. The streets, the police, how everyone engages you. You go to the offices that I'm talking about, public offices, that government offices, the way they engage you, the way they interact with you, the way they serve you, it's evident. You can see there is a culture of transparency, there is a culture of accountability, there is a culture that shuns, in as much as possible, they shun corruption. It's not easy to peddle and move around and try to influence corruptly the people in offices in Botswana. It's very difficult. They are very professional in how they carry themselves. So I do take them as an example, a shining beacon in Africa, in Southern Africa for that matter, in terms of transparency and how they govern their systems. Other countries, they struggle with corruption stemming from individuals. Individuals themselves are corrupt. They want the easy way. Some people are impatient. They can't stand in a queue for 2 minutes. They need to bribe someone to be at the front of the queue. So the individuals, the citizens themselves also encourage corruption. And the leaders themselves, they loot to the core and to the bone, because the citizens themselves have the corrupt tendency. So it becomes a culture which needs to be dealt with, which needs to be nipped in the bud.
And certainly, education is going to play an important role here, because
definitely,
if the I think it's going to be possible to get somebody that is purely clean and doing the right thing. That is a society that is corrupt, to produce somebody that is clean and doing the right thing. And the other, if you reverse it, it's also going to be possible. So,
yes,
for us to produce good leader, we need to take certain steps on our own individual part to move towards
yes,
be clean, towards be good. Because we need to
yes,
love ourselves, who we are. Because at the moment, we don't really love who we are. That is why we patronize things that are different from us. Like an example of being lost. That is what it means. Because that thing that you are trying to resemble is not you. In the process of trying to resemble what you are not, you lose what you are. And for you to find yourself back, it's going to be a little bit difficult. So I think that is where we are today. So I think education is going to play an important role. Of course, we also have opened up a line on that conversation, and we are still tracing it. And Now, I want to ask a question relating to, if a leader were to be responsible. Take example like Lagos, Nigeria. If you say you want to travel between one local government area to another local government area in Lagos, you will be struck in a traffic, and that traffic has been like this for years. Since I was just small like this, it has been like that. Now, somebody, because Lagos State have university, somebody should have been studying it, because that is why the university exists, to find solution to the problem. If education was made for them, because that is what it was supposed to be. Somebody should have been studying it. Okay, this is the way it is. Because you live in it, you die here. There is no reason why this should not concern you. Okay, this should be the solution, because that is how other people do it. Now, say we have a good leader who say, okay, all right. Now, the problem is that in Lagos, we need subway system. We need, because, and let's say it happens, say in Lagos State, we now build so many train track with underground subway system, tram, and bus system. This is going to make the city to be very rich, because we'll be collecting a lot of money, a lot of taxes, because the system is working. Now you want to move from one point to another point, it becomes easy for you. You are not doing what you are not supposed to do. Like you said before, you are just a fish that is swimming. This is normal. Nobody needs to celebrate you because you are a human being. This is what the Lagos State government and the institutions are supposed to do for the people that are living in Lagos. But up until this point, they don't have the agenda. It is not clear how the Lagos State traffic system is going to be resolved. So this is why we are talking of the responsibility of the people that are there. I understand that they go into the paralysis of analysis. Okay, you come and do it. That is not what it is. You don't call my mother to do the job of a governor. That is not his. That is not her job.
Yes.
All right. Now, what do you think are the thing that we should do? Because now I've leave the politician, I've leave the European. I want to look at me talking, and you. What do you think that we
Yeah.
should do? Of course, we represent the larger people, no, as individual, to stop the stealing, the looting of our resources, so that it can be a collective property that we can use to develop our continent. What is the responsibility of our individual African people?
Yeah, that is a very important question, which you'll find that first of all, we need to be people who love themselves, who understand that we are Africans first before anything else. As we make sure that we contribute to the nation building, we need to make sure that we contribute positively. It's not enough to just be critical of our governments without any meaningful contribution, because they have the power. They can ignore, even if you have noble ideas, just because you are criticizing them and your approach is not in the goodest sense, so to speak. What I would say each and every individual needs to do right now, you need to think outside the box, first of all. You need to be patriotic, love your country more than anything else, before anything else. Contribute positively to the development of your country, be it in ideas, be it in propositions, be it in certain things that you think the government needs to do certain things. You can use the channels that are available to try and reach out to the powers that be in the legal and possible peaceful ways that are available. And the other thing is that if you do something that is positive to the community, to the society itself, you are in a position to be better listened to by the powers that be. It does work wonders. If they see that you are a person who has got your country at heart, if they see that you do make efforts to make sure that you stand for your country, you speak the good about your country, and you are a patriotic individual. You love your country, not individuals within the country. You don't have blind obedience and blind followership. Some people, they just follow leaders blindly, irrespective of whether the leaders do good or bad. They don't care. They don't see the good. They see no evil, smell no evil, and taste no evil. But we need to be people who put our leadership into account. But as we put our leadership to account, we must contribute positively to our country. What is it that you can contribute as an individual for the benefit of your own country? Think outside the box. You have given an example of professors who are just there, and the problems are there, real problems that are relevant and affecting your own society. You see them every day. What do you do about those problems? Do you even think about how you can solve those problems? I think if you come up with certain ideas on how those problems can be solved and take the right steps to engage the powers that be, they might listen to them, they might not listen to them, but they would indeed take cognizance, and they would take note that there are certain people somewhere who are not just having negative criticism, but they are coming with criticism and proffering solutions to the same problems that they are critical of. And citizens need to come together, make sure that they contribute to the welfare of their communities. In your communities, there are people that you see daily, there are people that you know, they might be struggling. There are communities that you know, there are leaders that you know. Some of the leaders are there, they have the power, they have the means, they have the resources, but they have completely no idea. And your idea might contribute to them bringing development to that part of the community. So those are some of the things that we need to do. But definitely, leaders must be put to task. Definitely, leaders must be made to account. Definitely, community must be conscientized of the good things that the government is doing and the bad things that the government is also doing. And the community must be assisted in how they can be involved in positively contributing and developing the country. Of course, at an individual level, it's quite difficult. but it's possible.
Very much for that. Of course, that leads us to one argument that we already have a schedule with another person, which is about political consciousness. Because when we say people should decide upon what, based on what? Because you need to,
Yes,
if you don't have the proper education, you don't even know what you are deciding to start with. So I
yes,
think
yes,
African political elite haven't really created the education of their people who will
mm-hmm.
become leader after them. And this is a
Yes,
big error. We need to properly educate them, let them know this thing that we are talking about, how the system is configured, so that we
yeah,
don't just keep there like a dog that is running around with its own tail, because you are never going to get to the
mm.
end. We must
Yes,
know that it starts and ends with us. Whether we want to
yes,
live or die, it depends on us. Nobody is going to
yes,
come to our aid. If they come to our aid, good. But we don't need to bank on the possibility that somebody one day will come to help us. No. We need to have some kind
mm-hmm.
of preventive measure to the unexpected, like the COVID-19, for
Yes,
example. So that when the
yes,
COVID-19 came up, a lot of African leaders were running to Europe or US for help. That is a sign of irresponsibility on their part.
yes,
Because you, as a leader, should be prepared for what can happen. And when it happens, you should respond medically, politically, at the level of communication, at the level of finance. From every angle, you must be prepared. Because if you are not prepared, you are putting your people at risk. What if the
exactly.
thing had been worse in Africa? What would you do? Say in a place like Lagos, for example, what would you do? You can't
Mm.
say, United Nations didn't help us, as if we are a protectorate of the United Nations. If that is the case, why do we
No,
have a government? The United
yeah,
Nations is not the savior of Nigeria, for example, or Ghana, or
yeah,
Ivory Coast. The savior of Ghana is the Ghana government. You should be the one responsible for the safety, for the survival, for the progress of that country, not the United Nations, not the United States. For example, there is something that we don't have the time to go into today, just because we are talking about a lot of issues related to patriotism and all that. So I'm just breaking down some of these things. The issue of
yes,
military, we need to take it serious. The defense of our land, we need to take it very serious, because a lot of up to this time, we are still believing that if anything happens, we'll just call the United States to come and defend us. Sorry, they are going to fail you, except you are going to sell
yes,
yourself to them.
yes,
So what I want to happen is that, for example, when there was a conflict in in Sierra Leone and Liberia, Nigeria intervened immediately. That is what it should be. You should be ready,
yes,
ready for the next call. That is what leadership should be.
yeah,
Now,
exactly.
Dr. Leslie, we're talking about a lot of issues today. So I really want to thank you so much, because I learned a lot from it. And now, to conclude it, say, I don't know, maybe some kind of a message that you want to leave the people with to conclude the conversation.
Okay. As pertaining to the topic, we then finally dealt more on the lawfare. I would urge our people to revisit their history. And history is looking at events and how people behaved in time. And time is a revealer of character. If you look at the history, you'll get the character of the so-called superpowers who seem to be our saviors today. It will give us an insight into the real nature of how they think, how they operate, how they see us, and what's their worldview when it comes to their economics. We are simply the financiers of their systems by manipulating us in many ways, including the economics of today. But what I would leave to our people is, let's be people who study our history. Let's be people who know our history. Let's be people who know our worth. Let's understand that there is nothing that is cast in stone. Anything can be changed. If it be the laws can be easily changed through very democratic means and very legal means that are at our disposal. Let's put our representatives in parliament to task. They must deliver on the aims and goals of the liberation struggle. They must make sure that they empower and work for the empowerment of the African native. And when we engage all forms of investment, all forms of investors, let it be on an equal basis, a basis of equality and fairness. This is not something that is difficult to ask from our investors. It is not something difficult to ask from our colleagues who happen to be staying and coming from another continent. Let's be people who are conscious. Let's be people who study. Let's be people who think outside of the box. Let's be people who solve African problems using African solutions. Let's borrow from ideas from others, adapt them, and make them useful to our circumstances and our scenarios. Above all, let's be a peace-loving people. Let's love our country, let's love our continent, and let's love our fellow African brothers. Let's be there for each other. Let's educate our people for Africa, for the development of Africa, and for the empowerment of Africa and the emancipation thereof. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I really appreciate that. It has been really educative and informing for me. So I thank you so much. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening and talk to you in the next episode.